Folks are real wound up about the viral videos of the farmers protesting in Brussels, where they're using their tractors to basically bulldoze the cops and anything in their way. And a lot of folks are saying, well, why aren't Americans doing this? If Americans aren't rioting in the streets, they're not doing anything, they're not doing enough. And please go back and watch the video right before this one if you want to understand why America is not Europe and why the strategies and individual tactics that we use here need to be different, right? Because we are playing to the audience of the American people and we are trying to get them on board, and cultural differences as well as structural differences actually really matter when it comes to the kinds of tactics that you're employing. At this juncture, I think it's really important to pause for a second and read a little passage from Mark Engler and Paul Engler's book, This is an Uprising. This is about nonviolent revolutionary movements in the last several decades, because I think that there's something more going on here. When we look at protests in Europe that Americans would call vandalism or riots, when we look at the very brave, courageous, patriotic Albanian protesters who've been in the streets for weeks and weeks on end, and then we compare it to some of the organizing and some of the resistance in the United States, I understand why people are frustrated. And I know as a permaculture person that I'm constantly being like, the way out of this is community, right? Community is how we take care of each other, how we keep each other safe and fed, how we look out for each other in this time when the government has abandoned us and turned against us. But also, it's community that will help us get out of this mess and build a better world. And so when we're looking at what kind of resistance techniques we employ, right? What is our overarching strategy? Mass protest, mass disruptive action is just one tiny facet of that overarching picture of resistance. In this section, Engler and Engler are talking about the divide between structure and mass protest, between long-term organizing and disruptive uprisings. They say, with regard to organizing in the 1950s and 60s, sociologist Charles Payne has argued that the U.S. civil rights movement consisted of two distinct strains of activity. One, which he calls the community mobilizing tradition, was a lineage, quote, focused on a large-scale, relatively short-term set of public events, such as the famous campaigns in Birmingham and in Selma. This strain relied on the energy of mass protest. That is, your No King's Day or your local indivisible group getting together for a weekly protest, right? Or it is the folks in Albania who are out in the street for weeks and weeks. Payne contrasts this approach with the community organizing tradition, community mobilizing versus community organizing tradition. The organizing tradition is a structure-based lineage associated with the gradual base building and local leadership development carried out by the likes of legendary civil rights organizer Ella Baker. Sometimes the tension between these strains could erupt into heated disagreements. As Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee SNCC leader Stokely Carmichael would later write, organization versus mobilization was always a serious problem because every day-to-day tactical decision was affected by the strategic approach, every one. The chapter goes on to discuss those tensions, those disagreements between the SNCC and Martin Luther King's staff in the SCLC, right? The Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And I think that this is really worth going through because I see a lot of this happening in our organizing right now. I put out a video a couple of days ago where I was like, I had a little bit of an epiphany. I need to dial back my approach. I need to not do less, right? Not change my expectations, but I need to go back further in the process and lay more of a foundation. I feel like so many of us had really big ambitions, lofty, good, noble goals, but we need to do the building out of community and relationships in order to take care of each other for the coming food crisis or for our organizing to defend democracy, which obviously those are interlinked. And I had some guy in my comments who was like, you're convincing yourself and everybody else to do less, like you're not doing anything. No, backing up and saying we've kind of failed the structure tests that we've had, and that's okay, right? In permaculture, there's no such thing as failure, really. There are opportunities, right? And one of my favorite bands, Gunger, has this line in one of their songs, we can see it as a loss or as a chance. So when we have not passed structure tests that tell us that we are ready, we've built out the infrastructure, the framework, the community to pull off longer, sustained, disruptive events, that's a data point. That's a whole pile of data points that we can learn from and say, we need to back up. And we need to reinforce our scaffolding. We need to build out those support networks so that we can carry off larger, more sustained direct actions. And also so that we can take care of each other, and also so that we can build those parallel systems, those parallel structures that will eventually come to replace the corrupt, oppressive ones that we currently have. Too many people think that if you're doing small scale work to set yourself up for success, it's doing less than nothing. They want something big, they want something that's really visible. A lot of people I have noticed, especially outside the United States, or kind of those, I don't want to say sit on their couch and complain at everybody else that we're not rioting in the streets. The people who want you to put your body under the tank treads, right? The people who want you to go commit crimes in order to defend democracy. The people who want you to be brutalized by law enforcement, or else they are going to judge you, right? There's an awful lot of people who are very angry on the internet because they don't see Americans performing resistance in a way that is pleasing to them and meets their expectations. And I get real testy about it, because just because you don't see what people are doing, please don't presume that they're doing nothing. So many of the most important acts of resistance are ones you will never read about and never hear about. You want something that is sexy, that is dramatic, that looks like it does in the movies. That's not how resistance works. That's not how successful resistance movements are built. It is those small acts of connecting to your neighbor, those small acts of caring, and it is about aggregating our power, right? So there are mobilizing events, and then there's organizing, which is ongoing, right? There are these punctuated moments of protest, and sometimes they can go on for long periods. But the way that we get long-lasting systemic change is through organizing. It's not through protest. And that doesn't look sexy and flamboyant. That's not something that people watching our headline news from another country are ever going to hear about. Although you will hear stories of people acting courageously, bravely, doing all of that foundational work, doing all of that community building, if you spend 2 seconds on the right portions of social media. I don't know about y'all, but I'm encouraged on a daily basis watching not just acts of kindness, but people undertaking real risks, making real sacrifices to defend their neighbors, to resist the regime, right? Those are important undertakings, and they are laying the foundation not just for us to be successful in this short period in our history, but to build a better society as a whole, right? We need to begin as we mean to go along. If we want a country where we take care of each other, where we treat people with dignity and humanity, where every American deserves to have a roof over their head, to eat well, to have healthcare, where people are treated with justice, where people have access to liberty, then we have to do that in our organizing. It's not just about being mad in the streets and screaming and venting your anger. That feels really good in the moment, but it very much is that organizing, that community building that will bring about the lasting change that we need. For its part, structure-based organizing is right to contend that mass mobilizations are often fleeting, and that different types of organization are needed to institutionalize the progress made through periodic outbreaks of disruption. We're going to skip way down to the end of the section here. Although the contributions of structure are different from those of mass protest, Piven holds out the possibility for different groups of participants to specialize in different types of dissident activity. Organizations are not movements, but organizations can institutionalize and legalize the gains won through disruptive mobilization. And this really highlights for me 2 key concepts in permaculture. One is the principle, use, and value diversity. We don't have one-size-fits-all approaches. We're not looking for one strategy that everybody needs to be involved in. We actually need diversity. We need different tactics of direct action, but we also need people to be focused on those short duration sustained events, and people who are doing the slower work of community building and organizing for lasting change. Those things work in concert with each other. And also in permaculture, we talk about site-specific design. It's also people-specific design. We want to play to people's strengths, harness people's specific skills and passions. And I think that makes our resistance so much more likely to be successful. It also makes it more beautiful. It also makes it far more inclusive. Some people will be the folks marching in the streets. Some people will be the folks on the front lines. Some people are, washing dishes in the revolution. Some people are doing that slow, silent, behind the scenes work. The majority of folks need to be doing that unseen work behind the scenes to build out the scaffolding so that we can carry off larger events, and also we can get us where we need to go as a society.